I'd like to first start by talking just a little bit about where my inspiration and what my focus on was with this work. So when I first started this series of works, I set to explore the narratives and histories surrounding early inventions of mankind. I was very much interested in the old world technologies and the old world aesthetic that allows the skill and the marks of the hand and the overall craftsmanship of the inventor to become evident, not only in the object created, but also in the materials and processes chosen. In an effort to hone in upon a particular technology, I decided to kind of mine into my own family's heritage a bit more to kind of discover what they had been doing back in that day. In doing so, I discovered that my family had a long heritage of working with watercraft. My great-great-grandfather went to navigation school in Hong Kong and became the chief navigator in the Philippines. His son, my great-grandfather, was also trained in England as a shipping captain and went on to become a navigator throughout Australia, up into the Philippines, and up into Hong Kong and China as well. Watercraft has also been a big part of my family and my upbringing as well. I grew up around the ocean down south in Santa Barbara, and grew up surfing and always fishing and snorkeling and on boats. And so I was kind of naturally went in the direction of exploring the histories and narratives of watercraft and boats. In doing so, I was really wanted to focus on this idea of journey and navigation that's kind of inherent in the boat form. I also wanted to focus on the craftsmanship as a connecting point to both the material world as well as the natural world. I very much conceive these works on kind of on the edge of utility. You can kind of see that they might function in the ocean or something like that, especially with this one here, which is the first one I started with. But in closer examination, the viewer must kind of struggle with the inherent dysfunction that's built into the boats themselves. I allowed the seams of the boats to be open, the cracks to be evident. On this one here in particular, there's a lot of cracks in kind of the skin of the boat. I kind of went back and sewed those up so that you'd see the crack, but it would also kind of call attention to those cracks. And very much interested in this idea of impermanence and imperfections, and kind of highlighting those imperfections. In highlighting the process and the voice, and allowing the voice of the materials and the object to become evident, and at the same time denying this object of its inherent utility, my aim is that the viewer will then recognize these vessels as an object containing some particular story, so that if they're not functional, then you can actually kind of imagine yourself in them and going off into some kind of fantastical journey with these particular vessels. I also purposely leave a lot of the cut marks and a lot of the saw marks on the wood, and also some of the pencil lines that were involved in making the piece are also evident here. There's also a lot of parts where you can actually see where the saw kind of came into contact with a knot, or where there was a kind of a harsh curve that I had to maneuver around. I chose to leave those so that you could see the whole process of how they were made. I'm always looking for certain strategies that will allow me to allow the natural materials, the curve of the wood, the natural grain of the wood, the knots, and those elements that occur naturally in nature kind of come out and speak in the materials. And I feel like that also kind of helps draw our attention to where these materials came from and provides a relationship between the natural world and the material world. In designing these three pieces, I really wanted to push this idea of an evolution of form, not only in design, but also an evolution of the idea of watercraft and the fantastical properties that watercraft can have. So in this first work that I made here, I really was drawn to the fact that you could see the kind of the water movement in the actual grain pattern and the flowing of the planks that I've cut here. And I was really drawn to that, the fact that a boat form can actually mimic and look and read as water moving. I was also really interested in having a paddle form, or this rudder that's on top here, to read as kind of large and awkward and kind of speak to this idea of a struggle to navigate. And I also chose to push this idea of an evolution of form by carrying certain elements from one piece into the next. I chose to kind of mimic this oar look, especially with the knot and the wood, this is redwood, into this piece here, and actually specifically into the fin element, where I kind of wanted to carry over so that you can kind of see and access that evolution. I also was really wanting to push this idea of water, of the actual vessel becoming the water in the evolution of the boats. And so in doing so, in making this kind of outrigger piece here, I really kind of saw the water flowing through the outrigger and wanted to sculpt it in a way that it would read as the water movement coming through. I also decided to carry across this idea of cradling this vessel with the ropes into the idea of cradling this outrigger with these steel elements. So again, trying to just create a visual connection between the three pieces so you can see this evolution of form and this evolution of design, and them kind of getting to be more fantastical and also kind of reading more as water, the movement of water. So this was the last piece that I made, and I really kind of relinquished the most control over the materials in this piece, and really wanted to kind of allow the natural tendencies of the wood, the curves and the grain pattern to have an overall control over the final aesthetic in the piece. So in doing so, I kind of read this piece as the water kind of falling here and cascading down and then kind of hitting here and then bouncing up and over, and really kind of wanted to get away from more referential form of boat and kind of allowing the viewer to kind of recontextualize their idea of vessel and what a vessel can do and where it could be navigated to, and really push that idea of personal navigation, hoping that one might see themselves in the boat going somewhere else. Another element to that I worked into the installation was hanging these at different heights. I wanted to explore the idea of environment for these vessels. You can kind of question whether or not you are standing on the ground looking at these vessels floating off into the air, or you can see them as you're standing in water and they're floating past you, or you're standing in a stream and the stream is flowing around you and you can possibly get in, or maybe you're even underwater and you can pass under it and look up at the boat. So I wanted to kind of push this idea of environment, and so you can question all of that. The other element that works into that idea is the way that they're hung, and especially their balancing point, specifically on this piece. And I wanted them to hang in a way that you could kind of pass under them and around them, but also in a way that they would kind of bob and move and kind of mimic the natural movements of water, the currents, the tidal flow, the undulation of waves, and possibly even wind direction kind of changing the orientation, which also kind of speaks of a change in orientation of navigation and where else you might go. And trying to push the ideas of mimicking the of being in the boat and kind of going off into this journey. So my aim with all this work was to allow the materials and the process to come out in the forms so that it can help add to this idea of an object containing a narrative. That's pretty much all I have.